One November afternoon in 1870, on the deck of a ferry departing from Oakland, a tall man in a black overcoat bent down to greet his wife and three children, who had just returned from a long trip. In that moment, he didn't know that just a few steps behind him, a silent figure was waiting. The woman wore a black veil that covered her face. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped a pistol hidden inside a small gray handbag. When Alexander Crittenden looked up and saw the stranger approaching, he didn't have time to say a word. Bang! The crack of a single gunshot rang out, met by stunned stares from the crowd. That one bullet ended every lie, as if it were a final judgment. The woman behind the black veil was named Laura Fair. At 33, she had already endured 3 failed marriages. She had listened to countless promises and believed in a kind of love that might restore the dignity of a woman scorned by society. For 6 long years, she waited for the day he would leave his wife and officially call her his own. For 6 years, Alexander made vows, then stalled. He lived 2 separate lives, convinced they would never collide. Until that fateful afternoon when he uttered the final words, he would never choose her. Many believed Laura was a cold-blooded murderer, that she carefully planned to destroy the man who once gave her hope. But others felt sympathy. They saw her as a victim of a moral system rigged against women, a system where the dignity of the legal wife was fiercely protected, while the cast-aside woman was left only with shame. Sometimes, the clearest crimes are born from a love that had long since died in the shadows. If it were you, would a promise of a happy family life be worth waiting 6 years for? Laura D. Fair was born on June 22, 1837, in Holly Springs, Mississippi. She grew up in a family that moved frequently, constantly struggling to find stability amid the expanding frontiers of 19th century America. From an early age, her life was shaped by hardship, a chain of misfortunes that fell like inevitable dominoes. At age 16, Laura married William Hunt, but their happiness was short-lived. Her husband died just a few years later, leaving the young woman widowed, burdened with grief and an uncertain future. Not long after, she entered a second marriage with Thomas Grayson. That relationship quickly collapsed due to serious domestic conflict. With uncommon resolve, Laura chose to divorce, a bold decision in the rigid moral climate of the time. Her third marriage, to George Wheeler, ended in even greater tragedy. He died suddenly, leaving Laura to raise their young daughter Lillian alone. These repeated losses tested her endurance and forged in her a deep sense of self-reliance. It was a trait that set her apart, but also left her vulnerable to promises of security and love. In the 1860s, Laura moved to Virginia City, Nevada. The silver rush had drawn thousands hoping to strike it rich. Amid the influx, Laura rose to become a successful businesswoman. She ran the Tahoe House, a major hotel that served the constant flow of fortune seekers. Virginia City at the time was a bustling commercial hub where opportunity and ambition intertwined. Laura managed her business while also cultivating the image of a smart, independent woman, respected by the community. That image, a single mother who had built her career from the ground up, stood in stark contrast to the label of murderess she would later face. Her economic and social stability was a testament to her ability to adapt. But that very stability would also make her personal tragedy feel all the more jarring and painful. However, Victorian American society was deeply unforgiving toward a woman like Laura. As someone who had both divorced and been widowed, she was seen as deviating from the moral expectations of the time. In that era, a woman's honor was considered her most valuable asset. Any relationship with a married man was viewed as immoral and often led to severe social consequences. Laura longed for a safe harbor, a real family, after so many years of personal loss. It was at this moment that Alexander Parker Crittenden entered her life. Born in 1816, he was a prominent attorney in San Francisco, known for his refined appearance, eloquence, and wealth. Crittenden was highly respected as a powerful figure in the legal and political world. He came from the distinguished Crittenden family, with his father, John J. Crittenden, having served as a U.S. Senator. Alexander had built a strong career representing major commercial interests in the region. Yet, behind that polished image, he continued living with his wife, Clara Churchill Jones, and their children. With his charming and flirtatious nature, Crittenden pursued a relationship with Laura Fair. He promised her an ideal marriage, a new home, a second chance at reclaiming her honor, and the stability she craved for herself and her daughter. Their relationship began as a romantic affair. Laura placed her full trust in Crittenden. She believed he could be her escape from social judgment and the emotional wounds of her past. But that trust, set against a backdrop of societal prejudice and a dishonest man, laid the foundation for tragedy. A tragedy that was quietly waiting for her. The relationship between Laura D. Fair and Alexander Parker Crittenden lasted nearly 6 years, beginning in the 1860s. It was a deeply emotional affair, moving from passionate romance to suspicion, disappointment, and ultimately an eruption of anger. At first, they were swept up in moments of intimacy and heartfelt promises. Alexander repeatedly reassured Laura that he would arrange a future for them together. But those promises quickly turned into a series of prolonged delays. Each time Laura pressed him, he came up with a new reason: his work, the timing, or vague obstacles. These repeated assurances, without any concrete action, left Laura sinking deeper into frustration as her initial hope slowly gave way to resentment and a simmering fury. Inside Laura, emotions collided. She had staked everything on this relationship. She feared that if Alexander failed to keep his word, the truth about their connection would come to light. And that revelation could destroy the reputation she had fought so hard to build. Beyond that, Laura was torn by a deep sense of shame when she thought of her daughter, Lillian. The child might have to grow up in a household scorned by society. The fear of losing Alexander, her last hope for a stable future, blended with humiliation. She began to sense that she might be abandoned, left alone to face the harsh judgment of the world. Community pressure made the relationship even more suffocating. In Virginia City, rumors about Laura and Alexander's affair began to spread. Whispered conversations among friends, curious glances from neighbors, and vague remarks about their relationship gradually made Laura feel surrounded. The gossip didn't just wound her, it amplified her sense of isolation, as if the entire town was waiting for her to fail. The resentment caused by these unspoken criticisms only deepened Laura's emotional pain. Cracks in the relationship grew more apparent. Alexander's initial enthusiasm began to fade. Their meetings became less frequent. He started to avoid her whenever she asked questions. Laura sent letters filled with reproach, expressing her disappointment and hurt, but in return she received only silence. Laura was not weak. She had survived 3 failed marriages and rebuilt her life from nothing. But even the strongest have limits. At some point, Laura began to wonder if everything she had sacrificed, time, emotion, and reputation, meant nothing. What was left for her to hold on to? Silence doesn't just break relationships, it can wear down the very core of a person's spirit. In the final years of their nearly 6-year relationship, Laura D. Fair began to face a painful truth about Alexander Parker Crittenden. The signs of deception became increasingly apparent. Though he repeatedly promised to divorce his wife and marry Laura, Alexander continued to live peacefully with her. The relationship with Laura seemed to be nothing more than a passing secret. As rumors of their affair began to spread, Alexander publicly denied it. He referred to Laura as an old acquaintance in conversations with friends and colleagues. When confronted, he kept a deliberate distance. These denials struck deeply at Laura's pride. They turned a love she had once trusted into an open betrayal. Every time she heard his dismissive words, she felt the weight of his dishonesty, the dishonesty of the man in whom she had placed all her trust. Suppressing her pain, she wrote long emotional letters and sent them to him. In them, she demanded that he keep his promise of a lawful marriage. Each line carried a mix of anger and pleading. She pressed Alexander to make his intentions clear. Laura didn't stop there. She sought to confront him in person, hoping that a face-to-face meeting would force him to acknowledge his responsibility. In a moment of despair, she once said she would expose their relationship to the public as a way to compel him to face the consequences. It was a reckless act, for such a revelation would ruin her own reputation. These actions reflected not only Laura's growing desperation, but also marked a turning point, a surge of tension, as she realized she was fighting against a wall of silence and deceit. The walls of the Tahoe house, once a place where she felt safe, now seemed to close in, turning into a prison of humiliation. The most painful moment came when Laura grasped the harsh truth. Alexander had never intended to leave his wife. The promises she had clung to were nothing more than hollow memories. The trust Laura had once placed in him collapsed, leaving her with a deep, bitter sense of betrayal. That betrayal blurred the values she had always held on to. Even the pride she had fought to preserve began to falter. A storm of emotion rose within her, the inner world of a woman caught in the midst of losing everything: love, hope, and dignity. That sense of emptiness spread quietly, like a slow-burning fire, leaving her disoriented within her own soul. If everything has already fallen apart, what is left for someone to hold on to? On November 3rd, 1870, Laura D. Fair walked into a shop in San Francisco. Quietly, she prepared a small item, one that could be easily concealed beneath her cloak. It was the result of a mind fractured after years of repression. At that point, the disappointment within her had crossed the threshold of self-control. The act was calculated. She chose something discreet and easy to use, but it also revealed the agitation in Laura's state of mind. She had been swept into a current she could no longer resist. That preparation marked a turning point. The woman who once placed her hopes in love and honor was now ready for an act that defied both. Laura waited for him to appear, a silent, haunting wait. She knew the exact day Mrs. Clara Churchill Jones would return from her trip. Alexander would be at the Oakland ferry terminal to greet his family. That day, Laura appeared without a word. She wore a black cloak and a veiled hat, like a shadow hiding among the crowd. Her figure, blurred, mysterious, and resolute, cast a heavy tension. But in the bustle around her, no one seemed to notice. On the ferry, Laura stood in the shadows. She watched Alexander carefully. He stood beside his wife and son, cheerfully chatting. He didn't recognize her right away, perhaps because of the veil or perhaps because he felt certain his secret remained hidden. Laura moved closer, silently, like a shadow. Her eyes locked on the man who had once held all her trust. In that moment, everything around her seemed to freeze. She reached beneath her cloak, pulled out the concealed object, and pointed it directly at Alexander, then pulled the trigger without hesitation. The sharp sound pierced through the quiet hum of the ferry, shattering the ordinary calm. The family and surrounding passengers stood in stunned silence. Alexander collapsed, clutching his chest, falling with visible pain. It all happened so quickly, as if the moment had long been destined. Laura did not flee. She remained still, her face expressionless. Her eyes, cold, unblinking, rested on the man who had once been her entire world. When apprehended, she calmly declared that Alexander had destroyed her life, a statement that carried both a sense of release and the lingering weight of pain. Her composure revealed a woman who had lost everything, someone with nothing left to fear or protect. Those on the ferry looked at her with horror. The Crittenden family descended into chaos. Clara and the children collapsed beside him, sobbing his name in desperation. The scene formed a stark contrast. On one side, a family unraveling in grief. On the other, Laura, silent and still, as if she had died long ago within herself. The image resembled a tragic portrait of love cast in darkness. What had truly killed the person she once was, long before the gun was ever drawn? After the shooting aboard, the ferry that killed Alexander Parker Crittenden, Laura D. Fair quickly became the center of public attention across California. Newspapers from the San Francisco Chronicle to small local presses covered the story relentlessly. The trial soon became a public sensation. The public split into two opposing camps. One side condemned Laura as a cold-hearted woman who had taken a man's life in front of his family. The other, which included many women's rights advocates, viewed Laura as a victim, driven to the edge by deception and the crushing weight of social expectations. A woman pushed to the brink by broken promises and unforgiving moral standards. This divide reflected deeper fractures in 19th century American society over gender and justice. The first trial began in March 1871 in San Francisco. Crowds packed the courtroom, eager to witness the unfolding legal drama. Laura's defense was led by prominent attorneys such as Elisha Cook. He argued that she had not acted with clear intent, but had instead fallen victim to a temporary mental breakdown. They portrayed Laura as a woman driven to despair by Crittenden's repeated betrayals. At the time of the incident, she was in a fragile emotional state. The defense emphasized her mental vulnerability. Elisha Cook maintained that her actions were the result of accumulated pain and psychological collapse. Prosecutor Alexander Campbell led the case for the state with vigorous opposition. He emphasized that Laura had planned meticulously. She exchanged her original firearm for a smaller, concealable one, tracked Crittenden's schedule, and disguised herself in a black cloak and veil. To the prosecution, these details constituted clear evidence of premeditated murder, not a crime of passion. They presented a series of angry letters Laura had written to Crittenden, including threats to expose their relationship. These, they argued, demonstrated her composure and deliberate intent. The argument reached its peak when Campbell posed a pointed question. If Laura had truly lost control of her mind, why had she prepared so thoroughly? The courtroom clash reflected broader tensions in how society viewed women who committed crimes and the unequal footing they faced within the justice system. On April 27, 1871, the court found Laura D. Fair guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced her to death, as prescribed by California law at the time. The verdict sent shockwaves across the state, Women's rights advocates denounced the sentence as overly severe. The press remained fiercely divided. Some hailed it as justice, while others saw it as an unjust punishment inflicted on a woman betrayed and broken. After an appeal, the verdict was overturned in late 1871 due to procedural errors during the trial. The second trial, which opened in early 1872 in San Francisco, became a battleground between law and morality. The death sentence from the first trial was nullified based on evidence of bias during the jury's deliberations. Laura returned to court, hoping to regain her freedom. Crowds gathered in even greater numbers than during the first trial. Yet the public remained divided. One side viewed Laura as responsible for Crittenden's death. The other, led by Susan B. Anthony, saw her as a victim of betrayal and societal prejudice. The confrontation between defense and prosecution remained tense. Attorney Elisha Cook appealed to the jury's compassion, arguing that a woman isolated and deeply wounded could not have fully controlled her actions in that moment. The prosecution, however, maintained that this was a premeditated act. On September 26, 1872, after weeks of arguments, the jury found Laura D. Fair not criminally responsible due to temporary insanity. The courtroom erupted in both outcry and applause. Supporters, particularly women's rights advocates, hailed the decision as a victory for justice, an acknowledgement that women, too, could be victims. But many others were outraged. They saw the verdict as deeply controversial, raising the question, where is the line between victimhood and accountability? The case of Laura D. Fair, from the fatal gunshot aboard the ferry in 1870 to the controversial not guilty verdict in 1872, served as a mirror reflecting the deep fractures within 19th century American society. It raised a profound question. Where do we draw the line between victim and perpetrator? Laura was a woman betrayed, pushed to a violent act. But was she a murderer or a casualty of circumstance? That very question divided the public. It forced society to confront the invisible, injustices embedded in its moral and legal systems. From an ethical standpoint, the Laura Fair case challenged traditional notions of right and wrong. The verdict of temporary insanity sparked fierce debate. It opened the door to a broader conversation. Can someone driven to despair be forgiven, or is society merely excusing violence? This question extended beyond Laura's case, echoing through similar tragedies, and compelling reflection on the role of compassion in justice. Socially, the trial exposed gender inequality in a world that was often merciless toward women. It became a symbol of the struggle for women's rights. In a society that upheld strict moral codes, even a single illicit relationship could ruin a woman's entire life. The press of the time turned the case into a national story, highlighting the divide between those who sought punishment and those who called for understanding. Psychologically, the case of Laura Fair touches on the deepest corners of the human mind: despair, rage, and helplessness. Her journey shows how a mind can unravel under relentless pressure. The shot she fired at Alexander was, in her eyes, the only way to end the pain. Today, many legal scholars and women's rights advocates still view this case as a milestone. It marked a turning point in American jurisprudence, when women began to be judged not only as offenders, but also as human beings, with their own pain and limitations. For modern audiences, perhaps the most thought-provoking aspect lies not in the verdict, but in society's reaction. Have we truly evolved in our understanding of justice? Or are we still judging a person through the lens of gender and outdated moral standards? Do you believe Laura D. Fair was a criminal or a victim?